working in solidarity with each other to tackle. My name's Sarah Woolley. I'm the General Secretary of the Bakers Food and Allied Workers Union, and I've got the absolute pleasure of chairing the meeting tonight. And the format will be as follows. We're going to take three speakers who will all speak for up to 7 minutes, open it up for a short discussion, have another couple of speakers, then open it up again for discussion. We've got some information about the 14th and the 15th of November, get some final thoughts from the speakers, and then we'll close the meeting, hopefully leaving you as inspired as I know you will be. Please do introduce yourself in the chat. It'd be great to know who you are and where you're joining from tonight, or today, totally depending on where you are in the world, because we're not all sat here at 7 p.m. In the evening, are we? Enough from me. We've got some great speakers, and we're going to pass swiftly on to our first speaker, who is Sabrina Fernandes, who is a Brazilian political economist and eco-socialist. In an article just out, she's warned of the danger that COP30 will deploy symbolic imagery of nature and indigenous cultures whilst legitimising false solutions, corporate capture, and new rounds of green extractivist investment. So I don't know about you, but I'm really looking forward to hearing more about that. So Sabrina, come on in. You're very welcome.
Thanks, Sarah. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. I'm speaking to you from São Paulo, Brazil, and we are heading to COP30. People will be coming to the city of Belém in the Amazon very soon. There's already pre-COP meetings happening right now. And one of the issues that civil society in Brazil, so talking about unions, social movements, people involved in political collectives have been really worried about is the level of greenwashing that we're going to get through this next season, through the next weeks. Part of this does have to do with the fact that, yes, we are hosting COP30 in the Amazon, so the symbolism is very strong. It's also very important considering how Brazilian emissions are very concentrated on land use change and deforestation. And that's not just the Amazon, but all of the other biomes as well. So this should be helping us push towards a more radical agenda. However, what we're seeing is quite the opposite. I come bearing very bad news that despite a lot of social struggle coming from the indigenous movement and the environmental movement in Brazil, opposing new drilling for oil at the margins at the Bay Area where the Amazon River ends and meets the ocean, the environmental licensing agency in Brazil granted the license for the oil company in Brazil to start exploring oil in that area. And we do find that one of the really complicated things that we find in the global south is that a lot of fossil capitalism still being pushed forward in the name of sovereignty. So there's this argument that this is important for our energy sovereignty, for our energy independence, so we don't have to import fossil fuels anymore. So that justifies us drilling a little bit longer than other places and actually go into something that we're calling now not the energy transition, but quite the opposite, the energy regression. This is important to understand, for example, the role that gas is playing in this conversation. Fossil gas is being normalized again, is being greenwashed. This happened in one of the, in Europe, this was one of the cases as well. So like with nuclear and fossil gas being greenwashed, we have made a point to emphasize again that it's fossil, not natural gas, so that people get the type of imagery. And it's being sold as this transition fuel that will help us because it is not as polluting, does not emit as much as regular oil. However, this is actually leading into a conversation that's very convenient between fossil capital and green capital. A lot of these companies that are involved in fossil operations tend to say they're going green, either because they're investing in carbon capture technologies to say they're offsetting some of their operations, or because they're engaged in the carbon market, but also because they're diversifying their portfolio. This is very worrisome for us because last year in Baku, we already saw COP29 where one of the biggest delegations was actually the fossil fuel delegation. They have a lot of room to operate within official country delegations, but they also are entitled to space within the UNFCCC system as business and industry associations and NGOs, many times they go over the amount of people that will be like more than entire country or the youth organizations, for example. So understand that this specific meeting, there's a lot of stuff as a stake right now. We want to see if we'll get better results regarding climate financing. The results from last year were just horrible in that sense. They were very subpar from what we need. So there are a few opportunities to push this a little harder, but we do understand that this is very, very difficult as long as fossil fuels is still extending the conversation, and as long as the conversation around the inequalities around transition is not taken really seriously, so that just transition in one place can also mean just transition in another place. So a lot of my activism, my research has been involved in trying to come up with a program that is internationalist, where solidarity is not just a campaign, but it has to do with adjusting levels of production and consumption so we can actually stay under planetary limits. We just got really bad news recently that regarding like the Stockholm Resilience Institute talking about the 9 planetary limits, now saying that we are over 7 of them. This doesn't mean that they're all, a point of no return, but things are getting more complicated by the moment, and we should actually start facing the terrible understanding that the Paris Agreement is already outdated now. We need to go beyond in terms of our requirements, in terms of the NDCs, the way that the states are approaching this, because they are treating business as usual operations where you're only adjusting a few elements, either through geoengineering or technologies that are leading to false solutions, or creative accounting, really, when it comes to emissions. Countries still do not really report their emissions from military, for example. And we do know in the situation, like with the genocide in Gaza and wars in other parts of the world, the way imperialism is really expanding some regions. And this obviously has a lot to do with the way that the Trump government is operating in terms of fossil regression and stronger militarism. We know that these emissions, they do count a lot, and they're part of the sabotaging of these negotiation spaces. We have alternative spaces. Civil society is organized. There's a people summit. Like the last time that we had a people summit was in Glasgow. So we stayed without this opportunity for a couple of years, but it's also an opportunity for us to keep reflecting on how we are stuck within the COP calendar. A lot of things that we are still doing, they tend to be associated with the COP system. So what happens in November every year? So this is a big challenge for civil society everywhere to try to get momentum for climate action that has to do with reorganizing transitions as economic programs, not just as environmental programs, in a way that escapes from these strongholds that we find within the COP system and the UNFCCC system. I'm not so optimistic about what we're going to get out of here in Brazil. We do have more participation from indigenous and grassroots movements this time, but whether this translates into actually escaping from the fossil fuel stronghold, or perhaps tackling agribusiness and the need for a food and agri-systems transition, this is still something that I'd say we're a little bit pessimistic about. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Sabrina. And I appreciate you were like, I've not got good news to start with, but actually that was really, really interesting, and I'm sure helpful for everybody on the call. To keep to time, I will move straight on to our next speaker who's joined us, who is D Chandra Shekar, and he's the Organising Secretary of the INTUC and General Secretary of the Andhra Pradesh Telangana state branch of INTUC, and this is a huge trade union in India with a paid membership of 39.6 million. Yes, 39.6 million. I had to check the figures when I read that. How fantastic. And thank you so much, Chandra, for coming to speak to us tonight. You're very welcome.
Yes, good evening, everyone. and it's a midnight over here in India. uh, I'm very glad to be the part of this Zoom meeting. Really, it's one of the challenges what we are facing, because the Indian government presentation and the Niti Aayog, which is the authorized body of Indian government to be at the COP30, and the trade union movement is directly linked with each other. And I would say that the transition, what we are talking about, the just transition, is not as what the worldwide are talking about. Because in India, the government of India comes with new legislations, new laws, which are completely against the ILO conventions. Means when we are talking about transition, people are talking transition should be the more better one. The law should be more better. The facilities should be more better. But it's not that what we are being facing here. It's quite opposite. The legislations which have come are completely weakening the working people. And as you know that the INTUC, which is the largest trade union in India with a huge membership of 39.6 million, our membership has been increased because we were able to organize a large number of agriculture workers, because the Indian working people consist of 45% of the working population belongs to the agriculture sector, and this is the sector which is very much affected due to the climate change. And you know that climate change has impact been able to create more poverty among our people, specifically the agriculture workers, because the climate change has given a worse scenario by which a huge number of agriculture workers are losing their jobs. Their work is being decreased. For example, a worker who used to work around 250 days to 300 days in a year, his working days is being reduced from 200 to 50 days to 300 days. It is coming down to 250 days, below 250 days. Means a 40 days or 60 days of working time is being lost by a worker, and it is creating a huge poverty, and the purchasing power of the employees, the agriculture worker, is coming down, and they are being forced to migrate to the cities, and they are forced to end up with a very uncomfortable jobs, like working in construction workers, the contract workers, means a completely precarious works they are going on, which is affecting their day-to-day lives. What I would like to say is that from last 5 years, the data says that the agriculture worker in India has been losing his employability by at least 5% come down. Means in 2020, when the working days were around 300 days to 310 days per year, in 25 it has come down to 250 days. Means in a whole year, the 10 months he will be able to work, and the 2 months he is unable to get the employability, just because the climate change has affected them. A huge drought has come down, a huge unemployability has come down. The purchasing power has been able to impact in such a way that, because it affects the women. Women are the highest affected people because of the drought. When poverty comes, it affects the women. Women are completely abused. They are being isolated into many types of violations. Means in a family, culturally, in India, you know that women are prone to be more, means they need to respect the men, they need to respect the culture, and it affects the people, because most of the women working in agriculture sector are basically uneducated, and to organize these people and to educate them, the INTU has taken a lot of initiative, a lot of leadership has been brought in, and we were able to educate the workers by creating the capacity building development programs, organizing leadership development programs, and we were able to create a self-respect among the women workers. And most of our union members, the union office bearers, we have said that we will organize and we will give the leadership to the women. And I'm very proud to say that INTUC and the agriculture workers who are organized, who are unionized, are earning 30% more wages than the other women who are not organized, because it is due to the unionization, and it has given a huge positive approach for the women to join our unions. Because the climate change, the government is not able to do anything. Government doesn't come out with any good new policies. Government doesn't come with the new policies to see that the unemployability has to be reduced, some type of facilities to be needed to them, alternate employability has to be given. It is not done by the government, because the government doesn't come down. Government wants to do as a political issue. They want to give as a freebies, not as a right. But whereas as a union, we were able to say that, no, it's not correct. We don't want freebies. We want our women workers to be empowered with lot of leadership. We want to empower them to diversify into a new types of employability. For example, our women unions are being asked to given some type of training programs in making agarbattis, making the seeds, making fertilizers, making some types of agriculture products. Like even we were able to take them into the dairy industry, where we were able to see that many of our women workers have converted themselves as entrepreneurs. That is the biggest advantage what we are able to get. And the member of the union membership, the subscription which comes from the prompt payment comes from the women workers. And that is the biggest advantage for us. Because wherever we have the women workers who are working, we see that the women, we have percolated down into our union membership, because our union office bearers, our union bylaws says that the women has to be either the village president or general secretary or treasurer of the union. The three top priority positions has to be given to a women. And through that, we were able to create more than 45,000 women leaders system. And that is the biggest advantage for us. 45,000 women. And that is one of the biggest advantage.
Thank you so much for that. And I think even though we've only had two speakers so far, we can already see there's the similar issues and the similar challenges and the similar wins that we're all facing together. And it's important to remember that throughout the call tonight. We're going to move straight on to our next speaker, so do we give maximum time for the discussion bit. Our next speaker is Suraya Jawoodeen. And she's the former Deputy General Secretary of the National Education, Health and Allied Workers Union and the former head of Secretariat, I struggled with that more than anything else, at the National Union of Metal Workers in South Africa. And currently, she's the Africa Coordinator for the Trade Unions for Energy Democracy, who do some fabulous work. So, Suraya, you're more than welcome. Come on in.
Thank you for including me in your discussions tonight. I want to take a minute to introduce TUED. TUED stands for the Trade Unions for Energy Democracy. It's a global network of unions and close allies that work to advance democratic control and social ownership of energy in ways that promote solutions to the climate crisis, address energy poverty, resist the degradation of both land and people, and respond to attacks on worker rights and protections, which are important for trade unions as they engage with issues of climate change. TUED was established in 2012 and includes several trade unions, labor federations, social movements across the globe. And the importance of introducing this is that the TUED network is fully committed to a just transition for a low carbon future. TUED has consistently worked to expose energy policies that, in the name of saving the planet, simply transfer public funds and assets into the hands of private producers. Meanwhile, emissions continue to rise, climate targets are missed. The first speaker spoke about how outdated the Paris Agreement is. I couldn't agree more. And billions continue to endure energy poverty. And so whilst many have no access to energy, the use of energy continues to rise and emissions in parts of the world. So we deal with several contradictions as we attempt to deal with climate change, and it's a difficult concept for trade unions, particularly in the South. In October 2022, a South-South platform for cooperation was launched in Nairobi, Kenya. In Chuet, we call this Chuet South. And it's to advance a public pathway to a just energy transition. And in a minute, I'll explain my emphasis on energy. So ensuring that energy transition does not increase the twin burdens of debt and poverty for the South. Chuet calls this approach the public pathway. And in advancing the public pathway, regions get organized, trade unions in regions get organized to address their material conditions around climate change. So we are in this discussion because COP30 is going to take place in the next few days. And it's taking place on the 10th anniversary of the Paris Agreement. And amongst the many things the Paris Agreement sought to deal with was to limit the rise in global temperatures. So this COP expects countries to submit updated national climate plans, detailing how they'll reduce emissions. However, many countries have not even bothered to submit their plans, and those who have may not be submitting the most realistic targets. So among the key priority for this COP is climate finance, amongst other things around land and indigenous people and deforestation, which the first speaker referred to. But the last COP held in Baku agreed that global climate finance must be increased for developing nations. And this throws many challenges to the global South, because they need to address issues such as climate adaptation, unsustainable debt, new debt created through the financing mechanisms, and the harsh conditionalities that accompany such financing. And the issue of climate adaptation is difficult and mitigation for the South because its greenhouse emissions in Africa is substantially less than the North, but the impact of climate change is felt disproportionately. So despite its greenhouse emissions, Africa and the rest of the South have to deal with climate change in very specific ways. And some of this in the South itself takes different patterns. In addition, to add to the complexity, global political changes also affect how countries meet their targets. And I must say, for the South, many of these targets are not achievable and some are unrealistic. For example, the United States is no longer part of the Paris Agreement and has recently announced plans to reduce its global climate finance contribution. So all of this does impact on the meeting that's going to take place over the next few days. And as I've referred to earlier, in the global South, millions of people still lack access to clean and reliable electricity. We call this energy poverty. And they continue to rely on dirty energy sources for cooking and heating. And hence the Chuet focus on a public pathway for energy, because it's not de-linked from greenhouse emissions and climate change. In many of the South countries, coal remains a key source of energy production. And some economies, particularly in Africa, are still based on the mineral energy complex. So the issue of what constitutes a just transition may not be as straightforward as it could possibly be in other countries. Now, the issues from COP29 that I think is important to quickly reflect on is that at COP29 in 2024, Chuet organized an event where over 100 global South unions signed a statement demanding an adequate public finance approach to decarbonization. Amongst the demands, and I raise them because I think they're still relevant for this COP. Amongst those demands from the unions at COP29 was support for a public pathway approach to addressing climate change, one that requires a major policy shift away from the current privatized to decarbonized framework towards a pro-public model. And I'm trying to rush so that I keep to your time. COP meetings, the one that's taking place, and if there are going to be future COP meetings, have to recognize the role of public ownership and control over key sectors involved in climate action and energy transition. And these are energy, public transport, and raw materials. And in countries like Africa and the rest of the South, accessible, affordable transport, housing, all impact on the social wage of workers, but has a direct bearing on climate issues. Neoliberal climate and energy policies linked to privatization and commodification have failed, and they have failed to halt the rise in greenhouse gas emissions, but most multilateral institutions continue within this framework. So what are the issues around climate finance? I think climate finance must advance public, democratic, transparent control. We don't want a few World Bank officials deciding on conditionalities that are not clear to workers. Climate finance must prevent further debt and provide relief from existing debt for African countries who spend more on debt servicing than on health, education, and basic services. Climate finance has to maintain and expand public services. These are essential to both mitigation and adaptation efforts. Policies of blended finance and de-risking, such as World Bank approaches, seem to believe that the use of public funds will facilitate large private sector contributions. And we have seen that this fails. The private sector hijacks these processes for profit, not to provide services. A global trade union federation, INTUC, but the INTUC Africa had a meeting recently in August this year and agreed that trade unions must forge strategic alliances with other unions, social movements, and progressive organizations, and to take forward goals like public ownership and control of energy-related assets, liberation from the endless cycle of debt and exploitation. We have to advance a South-South cooperation to build climate-resilient societies, because this can't be done by any one union or any one government or one region. Global trade union centers organizing in the South and Africa have called on COP to deliver levels of climate finance that match the scale of the threat posed by climate change. And the uncomfortable truth is to recognize the historic responsibility of the global North. Some struggles and demands for trade unions must include a movement-building approach to advance public pathway options and achieve energy justice in Africa. We should be strengthening African Union efforts to decolonize and reconstruct Africa's structurally colonized public energy systems to advance industrialization and development. And industrialization and development for who? It can no longer be a situation of a few billionaires who then go into a battle around trade and tariffs. It's got to be to meet human needs and localized needs. COP cannot take place in a gender-neutral way. Women in the global South face the highest levels of poverty worldwide. Energy poverty disproportionately affects women in Africa, who carry the majority of domestic and care work, and they do so without electricity or clean cooking fuels. We're going to have to strengthen governance of what we call the global commons and ensure protection of global public goods. We must fight to reclaim and restore the public services and utilities so that South governments can grow their assets and capacities and probably be in a stronger position to pursue low carbon industrial and social development. There must be a radical overhaul of the multilateral finance system to end the debt crisis, the de-risking, the blended finance, because all this has done is deepen inequality and weaken African states, South states. This can't happen.
I don't want to interrupt you, but we're chewing into discussion time now because you've gone slightly over. So if you wouldn't mind wrapping up, please. Thank you.
2 points quickly. There's got to be a technology transfer for value-added green industrialization and low-carbon development. We can't be sending our minerals from Africa for lithium batteries to support solar to be produced elsewhere. So the technology transfer's got to take place. And the global north is going to have to find ways to lead the managed decline of fossil fuel use. My apologies for eating into your time.
Not at all. Apologies for interrupting you. Thank you so much for that. And another example of why we've got to make sure just transition is actually just, and it doesn't just fix one area of the world. We've got to make sure that every area of the world, especially the global south, is considered with any plan that we put together. So we've got a little bit of time now for some discussion and some points. Whilst you're thinking about your questions, we've got a great range of people from a great range of places tonight, all over the UK, from Scotland right down to Portsmouth and Devon. We've got people from Sweden, Poland, Zimbabwe, Brazil, so very much an international organised meeting. Got people from across the trade union movement in the UK and beyond. We've got Anti-Capital Resistance Council, Friends of the Earth, Cosmopoliticus from Brazil, the Climate Justice Coalition, Greener Jobs Alliance, Green Party, Hazards, the ETUC. We've got all sorts of people on the call tonight. It is brilliant to see you all, and thank you all for joining. I've given you enough time to think about if you've got a question now, so I'll bring Paul in because you've put your hand up. Please do put your digital hand up if you've got a question.
Yeah, very, very briefly, I think it's in response to Suraya's last point, because the whole question of finance for transition, the global north is moving in the opposite direction. And that's especially for those of us who live, well, for the global south, obviously that's a huge challenge, but those of us who live in the global north, that's an enormous responsibility, because our governments are cutting back on all of that, overseas aid and so forth, and instead they're putting finance into a military build-up. And I think this represents the fundamental challenge we've got, which is that the core power of global imperialism, the United States, has turned its back on even pretending to lead humanity towards sustainability. They are going, drill, baby, drill. It's just doubling down on fossil fuels. And they see the spread of solar panels across the global south, which undermines any prospect of them selling any fossil fuels, as an existential threat. And I think that's a key thing that we've got to face. And I think that also affects us very broadly in terms of the politics, both in the global north and the global south, in that they are, from the US, they are sponsoring far-right racist parties that are also climate denialist. And we can see that in Britain in a very strong way. And I'll just end on this point. I mean, obviously Farage is obvious, but Badenoch as well. Badenoch says that the model for the Conservative Party is Javier Milei. Right? So that is what we're fighting. And I think just the fact that this is a kind of an unhinged position from the point of view of the survival and future of humanity means that we actually have the prospect of a global majority to struggle against that and overcome it, which I don't think is going to be easy, but I think the strategic alignment is potentially there. That's it.
Thanks, Paul. I'll bring in, and I'm sorry, I don't know what your name is because it just says High Peak Green New Deal. So I will bring you in next if you let us know who you are, because I'm sure you're not called that.
Sorry, yeah, Linda Walker. I wanted to ask the speakers, and particularly Suraya, do you think the World Bank and the IMF can be reformed so that they meet the needs of the global south, or do you think they need to be abandoned and we start again with a global economic system? And also, do you think the fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty is a way to really move us in the right direction on cutting carbon and put some real pressure on the rich countries to play their part?
Thank you for that, Linda. That was part of our motion to Congress to support that treaty, as we and a couple of other unions already do. Ruth, do you want to come in next?
Yes, thanks. I'm Ruth. Well, sorry.
You're on twice, so we've got a bit of an echo.
I know. It's my internet so bad. I'm sorry.
No worries, that is a little better.
Okay. I'm Ruth London from Fuel Poverty Action, and I'm really grateful to Suraya for expanding the definition of just transition, because so often people say just transition and they're only talking about workers in fossil fuel industries and not about, first of all, even people's prices. It has to be just for what people can afford in terms of their energy bills in this country, but also just transition in terms of the global south. And when they talk about that, it's often just in terms of due diligence and not really reaching into questions of debt and finance and what women contribute. I'm grateful for that. And I just wanted to add to it the issue of how.
Oh, you're going in and out a little bit, Ruth. It might be worth popping it in the chat if you've got a second part to the question. I think we've lost Ruth. But if you can hear me, Ruth, if you pop it in the chat, we'll get the speakers to respond to it. That might be easier. Okay. So Sabrina's indicated that she'd like to come back on the question on the treaty, and then I'll open it up to the other speakers to see, including the ones that haven't spoken yet, to see if you wanted to respond to any of those, as nobody else has got their hand up at the minute. Sabrina.
Right. So I think it's really good to bring up this point, because the reason why the treaty initiative exists is because the fossil fuel conversation, the serious fossil fuel conversation, never takes place during COP. It doesn't really take place during, like, in the UN system, to be quite honest, right? It is mentioned, but we do not get quite far. So there's a belief that by going through another protocol, we might get room to negotiate specifically on fossil fuels. It does not mean abandoning the COP system. There's going to be the first fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty initiative conference next year, April 2026. Colombia has offered to host this conference. It has come as a result of a process of engaging with civil society organizations and certain governments, both municipal level, state level, but also reaching at the national level too. So Colombia supported this, and more countries are starting to join. So it is an opportunity to recenter the conversation of fossil fuels, because we feel that's absolutely needed, not just in the sense of making sure that the countries that developed by emitting from fossil fuels actually get to talk about reparations, because it's something that is only ever mentioned as a concept in the UN system, but not as actual politics. And I think that's one of the reasons why there's been a push to discuss climate financing, just to piggyback a little bit on the question as well. Climate financing, not just in the sense of demanding that other countries pay for it, but trying to figure out a way to come up with a global sovereign fund that's also based on tax justice. So these conversations of making sure that where you have tax evasion, where you have a lack of tax sovereignty because corporations are not paying what they owe the countries, getting that opportunity so that countries can recover some of their budget autonomy, and with a part of the budget autonomy, they can give back to a global fund that could not really, like Suraya mentioned, could not be governed by the current institutions. Though we do believe that we might be very far away in the current conversations around World Bank finance or IMF finance to actually make sure that it has anything to do with reform and not just kind of rebuilding their legitimacy, their a little bit of the greenwashing that's also happening in a lot of these meetings and some of these institutions.
Thank you, Sabrina. Suraya, did you want to come in as somebody kind of pointed a question to you?
Yeah, I think that a far too narrow view on just transition is not going to get anyone far, whether it's movements or NGOs or the labor movement. I think that a just transition in many ways is not de-linked from requiring planning. So whether it's a fossil fuel treaty or anything, the transition period is going to need proper planning. It's going to need a new energy order that recognizes state sovereignty in order to assist states to decarbonize in a way that allows the development, because we can't be arguing for degrowth, but a different kind of development. And these things are not de-linked from improving the social wage of the working class. And the working class is organized workers, the precarious workers, the unemployed layer. So it's stratas within the working class that can only assist to take a decarbonized economy forward through an improvement in the social wage, which is transport, housing, affordable energy. It's got to take into account the plight of women in that society and how much care work they carry in relation to climate, to jobs, to anything. The issue of can you reform the World Bank and IMF? The left has historically not believed that it's possible to reform them, and that we do need a new economic order internationally in the multilateral organizations. However, we're at a point where even the World Bank must be forced to recognize that its policies have failed, that its conditionalities, that its indebting the South and Africa has done nothing but basically taken those economies backward. It has not, its policies to include the private sector has not yielded much results. And I think COP and the labor movement and progressive movements are going to have to work out, do we put our energies behind exposing what has happened with the World Bank? In Africa, in particular in my country, in South Africa, where power plants, coal power plants, energy power plants are being moved to renewable energy, it's being done with massive World Bank loans. And servicing that debt has been astronomical. And the repurposing of those coal plants has not yielded the kind of energy levels we have needed. So I think that there are many complex issues, but the more we come together and build our networks and solidarity, I think the easier it becomes to grapple with these complex issues. Thanks.
Brilliant, thank you. And Chandra, did you have anything else to add? We have got another discussion session in about 15 minutes, so do think of further questions to ask and we can bring you back in. If I know Chandra's got his... Did you have anything quickly to add on that first section? If not, I can bring you in the second.
Yeah, sister. I would like to say that the transition has been affecting the labor force a lot. For example, the transition from the fossil fuel like the thermal energy to diversion to the solar power, a huge unemployability is being created and the government is unable to address it. And that is the biggest crisis. And the transport industry, where we have been getting converted into the new electricity buses are replacing the oil, the fossil fuel buses. There, a huge employability means around 65 to 70% of the employment is being lost. So it is one of the biggest threat which is happening due to just transition, and it is nothing but a huge number of population is being moved or thrown back into the poverty, and this needs to be addressed. The government needs to address it, and the trade unions, the Tunga, which is going to represent in the COP, has to have got a huge uh, dialogue to discuss about these issues. Because as he done, the CSOs, we talk about CSOs, in the CSOs, the working people and the trade union have got very little to speak out. I think the participation has to increase, and more importantly, a proper dialogue has to take place for that.
Thank you. Suzanne, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I think I will jump in because I think that some of the points that Suraya was making and Chandra was making there are a really important sort of moment in the conversation. And I will say, by the way, just how brilliant it is to be on a call with people internationally sharing our thoughts, our experiences, what we see as strategic importance for an international working class movement that wants to tackle the climate crisis. But I think that discussion that was just sort of tail ending there around, so-called just transition, because the reality is it's not a just transition. It's certainly not a transition. I mean, if we start with that first point, it's not a transition. Sabrina just mentioned, why the fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty might be an important way of taking things forward in terms of, because it focuses on fossil fuels, and none of what happens focuses on fossil fuels. So what is happening is the things that Suraya have mentioned, the repurposing of the coal-powered stations, and what Chandra's mentioned, the introduction of electric vehicles, is nothing. It's not focused on a transition. It's not focused on reducing emissions. It's focused on a sort of capital agenda. Where is it that they can make money? How can they make money? How can they expand? How can they expand profits? But the problem is, so it's not a transition, and it's certainly not just. If you're losing employment, it's a time when we need more people in work. There are so many jobs to be done if we were to transform and transition our economy to match the needs of the climate crisis and the needs of people and planet. So it's none of those things. But the problem is that what is happening, because I think one of the things that Chandra was saying, because there's a lack of engagement broader within the trade union movement on the climate issue and what it means for workers, then that what happens is it slips away from us, because it's easy for those who are not interested in the needs of working class people to say, look what's been done to you under the name of just transition. So why not get back behind coal-fired power stations? Why not get back behind fossil fuels? Why not get back behind? And that's clearly what's happening in terms of the far right agenda. So I've just sort of want to say that at this stage, hence why one of the things that we want to do, and we are emboldened and armed to do it more effectively through meetings and conversations like this, is in the UK trade union movement, we want to take up a year of trade union climate campaigning and think about how we can make the climate issue central to trade union organisation, both in terms of adaptation, but absolutely in terms of mitigation as well, and in terms of international solidarity. I will stop there. Sorry, enough from me, Sarah.
No, that was a really important interjection, Suzanne, because it kind of summarised everything that's been said and brought us back to thinking about what we need to do over the next 12 months, why this COP's so important and why this meeting's so important tonight. So no, thank you for coming in. If you have got any questions, keep them in the back of your mind, because we are going to take another couple of speakers and then we'll open it back up to you. So we'll move on to our next speaker, who is Dr. Sifiso Ndlovu. I think I've pronounced that right, and I'm so sorry, we did check at the beginning. Who is a towering figure in Zimbabwean education and trade unionism, spanning 44 years. he says, in education service, which I'm not sure, I believe it's been that long. He's currently serving as the Chief Executive Officer of the Zimbabwe Teachers Association since 2010 and focuses passionately on the holistic transformation of education systems. You are very welcome, Dr. Sifiso. Come on in. Make sure you take yourself off mute, though.
Thank you, Sarah, and welcome and good evening, everybody. Yes, believe it or not, Sarah, that's true, 44 years. I come from Zimbabwe Teachers Association, which is an affiliate to the Confederation of Zimbabwean Public Service Unions. And we now subscribe strongly to the agenda that is before us, and we hold true to the fact that climate emergency is a class emergency. And because of that, we also believe that it is not a scientific anomaly that we are having this problem. We want to believe it is a working class reality because we are seeing it live and direct. For example, in our neighboring country here, Mozambique, the flooded mines are a reminder that we are having a problem with the climate. And in Zimbabwe, the drought-stricken farms were a reminder clearly that food production is threatened, and we are in a threatened environment in terms of our food, and therefore the cost of getting that food. And obviously in Britain, it's a good example of the heat stress classrooms that we have now is an indication of this crisis that we're in. And it has been acknowledged very strongly, even by the convention itself, that in terms of historical terms, the emissions that we are seeing and the current emissions are from the developed countries, and the poor, who are mostly from the global south, are bearing they are vulnerable and they are bearing the greatest burden of this issue. So therefore, this asymmetry clearly situates this crisis into a class struggle, and therefore we believe strongly that it is a class struggle as well. And yet what are we seeing? We're seeing the developed world doubling down on fossil capital and believing that this is the way that they'll go on, and at the same time encouraging the global south to talk about adaptation. Adaptation is fatalistic. We should be talking about transformation and bringing in not a transition, but a transformation of this system. And that's why, as we stand here, we want to believe that the current arrangement where we are talking about the convention, which is a framework, fine, and the Paris Agreement, which is a persuasive document, is not enough. And this should also be changed, and we need to move on faster with them. Because we find that in the Paris Agreement, for example, that's why countries are not reporting. They are given a free way of having to determine their contributions towards the carbon emission reductions, and they are not doing so out of probably compelling arrangement, but they're doing so out of willing disposal, as it were. So we therefore of the International Court of Justice in the recent advisory opinion is a very welcome development, because it is bringing in the concept of justiciability of the state inaction. That makes it clear that countries who are not complying to this are therefore creating a harm to the international obligation, and therefore it will constitute a wrong stance from those countries. That, in a way, is now bringing in teeth into the movement, and therefore we want to support. And we think COP30, as we move forward now, should therefore be focusing also on the justiciability of countries that are failing to adhere to some of the agreements and conventions that we're putting in place. We are also seeing clearly that this issue, while it is an advisory note, it is also heightening the issue of climate change into a violation of human rights, and therefore an intergenerational question of equity, which is being here affected by the issues around climate change. And we are encouraging the working class as well, as we have since adopted this in our confederation as part of our agenda very strongly, that let us address it strongly, because we've seen it affecting livelihoods. Where the issues of our small-scale farmers are failing to pick up, where we are seeing our factory workers failing to live well, where we are seeing our informal traders failing to do so. More so in a country like us, who are under sanctions, who have been put under sanctions for the last 20 years. And that clearly is an indication of how violent the global north is in terms of that, and is bearing on the climate change problems as well. Coming from education, and as teachers, we have seen how climate change is disrupting learning in our schools. We've seen how unsafe infrastructure is endangering the lives of our learners and teachers. We've also seen how the continuity of education has now been affected. So that clearly is a brand that we have to face as the Global South. And therefore, we think strongly that climate change has become the silent wedge cutter in our lifetime. It has become the pension thief in our lifetime, become the job destroyer, and of course, in our generation, and is now the new face of global inequality. And that is how we can frame this global inequality and talk to it strongly. What must we do in solidarity? This is where we come in. Our persuasion is that we should move from policy to people. And we believe that the convention and the Paris Agreement are sitting on this concept of cooperation and solidarity of the world, and meaning that we must now move the treaties from the treaties to the unions, which is exactly what we are doing. We want to acknowledge that. From the COP halls to the classrooms, and as trade unionists, we therefore link climate justice to workplace justice. That is the same. Thank you, Trade Union Congress of the United Kingdom, for coming up with a Union Climate Action year 2025-2026, because you are reminding us that as workers, we must organize for decent, well-paid, and unionized climate jobs. That reminder is very strong, and we thank you for that. And obviously, you are reminding us that it is in the interest of us that we have public ownership of renewable energy and transport. And I think I subscribed to what Suraya was saying in terms of public ownership of these developments. And what then will then transition mean? Obviously, if you are talking about transition, which is a word I want to use reluctantly because I want to talk of transformation, and I'll only use it because it is now the lexicon that we are using in our language of COP and many other spheres of our communication. Yes, we don't want to leave anyone behind, but sure, Global South is being left behind here. And as we try to decarbonize the economies, so economies must be green. That's true. We decarbonize them. Then what does it mean for education? It means that we should come up with climate smart education. Climate smart education is no longer an issue of just teaching. It is a survival strategy, and a strategy which can now come in to support the transformation of which we are looking for. And this issue of climate smart education is equipping teachers and students as change agents to resilience around the green skills, and then also to resilience around development towards green skills. And what does it mean to the Global South and Global North justice? It means compelling, which is why the justiciability after the pronunciation by the ICJ is very critical, that we try to force and put in compelling areas to ensure that nations honor their finance and technology commitments. as given under Article 9 to 11 of the Paris Agreement. If that is put into action as well, it can prove to be one of the strong issues. And as I said earlier on, as we move towards transformation more than adaptation, we must reject adaptation as fatalistic. And suggesting that Global South deserves adaptation is to suggest that we live with the problem of climate change, and that is not the correct thing. We should meet more than adapt to it. And Article 2 of the Paris Agreement is key about it, because it talks about climate resilient development in a manner that does not threaten food production. So when I talk about climate development, resilient development, you are talking about transformation more than adaptation, as we see it. For workers, this means that the production must be good, the production must be sustainable, and education must be sustainable, agriculture must be sustainable, energy must be sustainable. These are the issues. It also means that we should empower the labor movement, as we are doing today, and in this discussion, where we become the co-architects of climate policy, not passive victims of green restructuring, where we sit and listen to green restructuring and consume it, but then we should be part of the production of those policies. Just as ILO, in its just transition principles, insist dialogue between governments, employers, and workers must shape climate policy, because social justice and environmental integrity rise and fall together. That is truth. And now, what are we doing in education? I would like to share with you our commitment as education, as part of the Education International family. We have
Apologies for interrupting. You've got about a minute left.
Thank you. I'm coming to end. Yes,
okay.
Yes. We are talking. We are situating teachers as the linchpin of climate education, and this is where we're saying teachers at the heart of greening the schools in our economy. And as I conclude, thank you for reminding me of the time. There is an expose that we should now move away from climate despair to climate solidarity, where the crisis has now shown us the moral truth that we cannot survive and save the planet without saving the workers. We need to save them. The framework has given us, the UNFCCC has given, the convention has given us the framework. The Paris Agreement has given us the goals. The ICJ has now given us the teeth. What remains is for us to organize the work, act global solidarity. And we must move away from an injury to one is an injury to all, to an emission by one is an impact to all. The fight goes on. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Apologies for interrupting you. I think, there was a couple of things then. The transformation, not transition, and the emission for one impacts all. Brilliant. And we should definitely look at taking those forward. Before I bring in our next speaker, Sabrina's not going to be able to stick around until the end. So I just wanted to give her the opportunity if she wanted to come in and do a quick minute, because the speakers will get a quick minute at the end to come back in on anything. Sabrina, did you want to come in before you had to shoot off?
Yes, sorry, I just have to leave very quickly. I left a little message in the chat as well, because I do think that's really important. We're seeing a build up again of trade unions engaging with this conversation at the international level. So not just about transitioning the jobs in one particular sector, it is really about these internationalist alliances. And this is really important, because right now we have conversations where just transition plans are happening in the global north at the expense of workers in the global south. It has to do with value chains, it has to do with expectations around industries, and it has to do with shifting fuel and energy production to abide for the same development pathways of the global north. So we don't want to reproduce this type of colonialism. So it's a mix of fossil colonialism and green colonialism. It does happen that sometimes governments are working with the workers to push this type of agenda. So there's a really good opportunity to reclaim the agenda, to requalify it, and to make sure that when it's talking about it being just, when it's talking about it being a transition or development, that is actually compatible with planetary limits and the notion of justice every other place. So thank you very much. This is it's a very great initiative by the trade unions in the UK, and I hope to join you or see you in other places, other circumstances as well. Thank you very much.
Thank
Bye.
you so much, Sabrina, for joining us. We'll move on to our next speaker and then we'll open it up for discussions. So our next speaker is, let me get my notes, Leon Seeley-Huggins, who is the senior campaigner on just transition at War and Want on the campaign ahead of COP30 for a Belém, and my accents are not great, so please excuse the Yorkshire pronunciation of that, action mechanism to bring about fair, rights-based global action, climate action through the Just Transition Work Programme. So Leon, I know I've seen you somewhere. Please come in. You are very welcome.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much for having me, and to the other speakers for their contributions. I think what I have to say will build very much on a lot of the points that have already been made. So at War and Want, our vision of just, equitable and ecological transition is that it's transformational, and it is that it touches every aspect of society, including the food sector, public services, energy, nature ecology, global economy, and so on. And I'll share some resources in the chat when I finish speaking. We know that transitions are already underway, or at least some changes to the global energy infrastructure, nowhere near what's necessary and nowhere near as quickly as it needs to happen. And unfortunately, with the biggest burden falling on the most marginalized, both here in the UK in terms of workers who are losing their job without thoughts for what comes next, and in terms of the global supply chains that Sabrina mentioned a moment ago, and the impacts of mining and other kind of processes that are part of the just transition, the so-called just transition, which are taking place. But yeah, as many speakers have already said, we need the opposite. We need to protect rights, create decent jobs, guarantee dignity for all within planetary boundaries. And I think there's a lot of evidence as to why we can't have just transition without transformation. And you could consider where the emissions are coming from, that it's just the richest 10% of people who are responsible for 48% of the global emissions, and the bottom 50% of the world's population responsible for just 12% of emissions. This is clear that emissions, the harms that are produced by climate breakdown are a class issue, and that the ruling classes benefit the most from uneven extraction and pollution, and they're also the ones who are the most responsible. And a couple of the previous speakers spoke about finance and its relationship to COPs. Well, there's a lot of money in the current system. There's a lot of profit being made, $2.4 trillion worth of income earned by the oil and gas industry last year. Fossil fuels subsidized to the tune of $7 trillion. And we know that the majority of that wealth is not going to the workers who work in those industries or sectors. It's going to the wealthy shareholders, bosses, owners of those companies. All of that, I guess, is the backdrop for the campaign that's taking place in relation to this COP. And I co-coordinate along with a comrade from the Asian People's Movement on Debt and Development. I co-coordinate the global campaign to demand climate justice working group on just transition. So it's a campaign made up of predominantly global South groups, but some global Northern organizations as well, who have been attending COP and also campaigning above and beyond COP at various points in the calendar this year. There have been mobilizations in relation to the IMF and World Bank meetings, global days of action in September, and of course the day of action and days of action that have been mentioned already on the call. And we've been following the just transition negotiations within COP. It gets very technical. I won't go into too much detail unless people ask for more, but the just transition negotiations within COP fall under the Just Transition Work Programme. So that's the formal negotiating stream under which all of these conversations happen. What we've been seeing there is that Northern governments, and it is predominantly Northern governments, have been dragging their feet on any efforts which could actually deliver even even a small amount of real justice as part of the transition. One area is that they've been seeking to narrow the Just Transition Work Programme solely to the energy sector and its workforce, instead of, as many people on this call have pointed out, understanding that Just Transition has to be transformative. It has to touch every aspect of our economy and society. Also, richer countries have been trying to sort of shirk their responsibilities, their historical responsibilities. So they are, bound by the UNFCCC, the convention, by the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. And this means that, the more industrialized a country is, the more that it's likely to have contributed to climate damage, and therefore that those countries should carry the greatest responsibility to mitigate that damage. And this is something that rich countries are trying to escape from when they talk about just transition under the Just Transition Work Programme. And the notion of fair shares, the idea that some countries, and particularly some people, some extremely wealthy people, have emitted far more than their fair share of emissions and occupied more of the Earth's atmospheric space. So in contrast, a lot of global southern governments really are adamant that the Just Transition Work Programme has to deliver a concrete outcome. And it's already been mentioned as well that this is all taking place in the context of the unraveling of international and multilateral processes, the bullying trade practices of, yes, the US, but also if you look at the carbon border adjustment mechanism, the EU and the UK, and the ongoing genocide, which is kind of, further undermining or further illustrating the lack of power of multilateral international processes and agreements. So in that context, it's really important that we as grassroots groups, as unionists, as workers and campaigners kind of hold governments to account. So COP isn't the limit of our horizons, but it is an important moment and an important forum within which to kind of hold northern governments to account. So at this COP, lots of groups have been coming together, including, trade unions, grassroots groups and others, feminist organizers, to call for a Belém action mechanism. So I'm not sure on the pronunciation either, Sarah, but the idea is that this would be a new permanent agenda item under which to force a conversation on just transition as part of the COP process. Because at the moment, the Just Transition Work Programme is due to expire. And once it's gone, it's gone. There won't be any other space within which to talk about any issues of labor rights, workers' rights, and indeed the broader conversation around just transition, even if rich countries are seeking to sort of narrow the scope away from that. And so, here in the UK, we coordinated an open letter to government calling on the UK to kind of match some of its rhetoric with action. So, Ed Miliband went to COP29 and kind of talked a reasonable talk about just transition and saying that you can't have a climate transition without justice, and that doesn't work. But obviously we know about the domestic policies of the government, and we also have seen the UK kind of being one of the big blockers in the negotiating room against a just transition agreement, which would acknowledge the role of common but differentiated responsibilities, or that would see rich countries putting up the finance that's necessary to pay for just transition. Because that's another issue. A lot of global southern countries say, well, we want to install these technologies, but you've got them on patent. You would have to get them under license, which are prohibitively expensive. We can't afford the licenses for some of these technologies that are required for the green transition. Leaving aside the question of, how much responsibility do those poorer countries hold for pollution in the first place? But even if they seek to develop in a way that's that sidesteps fossil fuels, often they can't access the technology because it's held under license by companies in countries like the UK. So we're trying to put pressure on the UK government to say that actually, you need to match your rhetoric with action, and we'll be going to COP to kind of continue to hold their feet to the fire. We're still waiting for a response to our open letter, which we sent last week, but we think that compared to the previous government, which is, I was at COP last year under the previous government, where we were calling for $5 trillion as a down payment on the climate debt that's owed by rich countries to the south, to the global south. This year, there might be a chance of some movement on this particular issue by this particular minister. We'll see. But this is an important moment. I think we do the organizing above and beyond COP, and we push for transformational just transitions beyond COP. But this is an important moment at which to intervene on this specific issue. anyway, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Sarah, you're on mute.
Oops. That was going to happen at some point. Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you so much for that, Leon, and giving us that overview. We've got time for probably a couple of questions, as long as they're quick. And then Suzanne's going to talk about some stuff that we're doing around COP around the 14th and 15th of November. And then we'll bring the speakers back in for a quick 2-minute fire final thoughts. So, Louisa, do you want to come in?
Hold on. Good evening. I'm a member of the National Pensioners Convention Climate Change Working Party. And everybody seems to forget that climate change affects older people, even worse today than at any other time. And it'd be great. Our chair, Claire Wilkins, she attends COP. I haven't had the chance to, but the discussions today have been really enlightening. And when Charlie was talking about India, I suppose many African countries where it's the women, not just older people, but women are more victims of climate change practices and economic. I'm also a member of Equity, where we have in our contracts we have equity for a Green New Deal, so we get producers to sign up to our Green New Deal, and I campaign for a just transition. It's terrible. Climate change is inevitable. We can't avoid it, but something has to give and something has to be done. And the rich, the powerful, the rich and powerful have to bear responsibility for most of what we are undergoing today. Thank you.
I nearly did it again then. Thank you so much for that, Louisa. You're right. They do have to bear some accountability, and it's down to us to hold them accountable. What I will do is, as we are near the end, we want to finish at past. I'll bring Suzanne in, and then we'll bring the speakers back in for a quick 1-minute roundup each, and then I will close the meeting. So Suzanne, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. And if there were other questions that people wanted to share, but there hasn't been time in this meeting, which tells us that we need many more meetings like this, please pop those questions in the chat. And I just want to sort of thank Louisa for her contribution. I wonder, Louisa, whether we could sort of be in contact, because working with the National Pensions Convention
Yes.
around these issues, I think would be a fantastic thing.
Yes, that's great. Yes.
I think so. It's never a true word, because we're quite right when we talk about young people and the future, but actually Louisa nailed it there as well. And what they're trying to do, they're trying to create like an intergenerational competition.
That's it. That's it. You use the word. Yes.
And pit us against each other. Oh, actually, we have to be. We have to stand united.
After all, pensioners even benefit.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So I just want to say the 14th of November is during the COP, and it's going to be a trade union workplace day of action. Now, if you're on this call and you can do something in your workplace on that day, then organize to do it. Louisa, perhaps it would be it's lovely to hear your affirmation, but perhaps it would be good to if you could mute. But thanks for that.
Oh, sorry. I thought I...
So if you are in a workplace or a trade union branch, think about what you can do on that day or in that week if it's not possible to do something on the 14th. So there are so many things that we could do. You could just mention climate change to your colleagues at a very, very simple level. Better still, you could bring your colleagues together in a union meeting. There are bound to be issues in your workplace, and this can be a really important agenda item in a workplace meeting. You could invite a speaker in. You could join other workers. I know a number of trades councils are thinking about how can they build people together in the early evening to be on the streets visibly as workers and trade unionists on the eve of the protests the next day. You could get your colleagues together and just hold up your messages on the climate crisis. It is a working class and it is a trade union issue. Could meet to discuss, Safiso mentioned it earlier, you meet to discuss how you're going to organise in preparation for the impacts of climate change. We have hazards activists on the line here, and they've shared obviously some of the important things that we need to do in terms of health and safety. I'm going to stop at that point. The crucial thing is, can you do something? Can you stand with somebody else? Can you state clearly in a space with other trade unionists that this is a working class and trade union issue? Whatever you do, take some photographs, share what you do with Campaign Against Climate Change with ourselves so we can empower other people to take similar action. On the following day, please, wherever you are, hopefully there are protests taking place on the 15th. This is a day of international global solidarity. Take to the streets, bring your union banners to those demonstrations, bring your placards and your demands as workers to those demonstrations, and let's make the workers' movement both a visible part of the global climate struggle, but as Safiso said earlier, the architects of climate policy. Workers should be the architects of climate policy, not the victims. I love that expression, Safiso, not the victims of green restructuring, capitalist green restructuring, essentially, which is at best what we've been offered at this moment in time while the world burns. And then just one final thing. We want to make this a year of trade union climate action. As a educator, I'm a teacher. So just listening to Safiso speak, and there wasn't quite enough time to talk about climate and education, climate smart education, but I just think in terms of my comrades and friends on this call, we in our union are planning ahead. What a wonderful thing to bring Safiso and other trade union educators into a call together so we could share our stories, but also look at what are actions of global solidarity, what can we unite together to do? And there are obviously some clear focuses that we could work together in solidarity over. And that's just my union. There are many other unions where we could start to think about those things. So finally, please stay in touch for this year of trade union climate action. Look at the resources that we're sharing. Think about how you could get involved. This will not be the last meeting during this year of trade union climate action, but make the 14th a good, strong workplace day of action wherever you can and however you can.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. Safiso, do you want to come back in on anything? You and Leon didn't have the opportunity earlier to come back and respond on anything. You're on mute.
Thank you, Sarah. Yes, my observation, Sarah, is that as we move into climate intervention, the issue of climate justice, I want to emphasize, is very critical, because climate justice is holistic and is intertwined with humanity and community practice. And community practice is speaking to sometimes even indigenous knowledge systems, which we've ignored, particularly when we look at the kind of knowledge that we are sharing with our learners from where we come from. And also it is intertwined with ecology in general and economies, and therefore we need to have that climate justice observed from that holistic point of view. Thank you very much.
Thank you ever so much. And Leon, did you want to come back in on anything?
Just to thank everyone, and I think the energy on this call and the responses and interventions from the floor are exactly the kind of energy we're going to need to secure a truly just transition. So I'll see you all in the struggle.
Thank you ever so much. And I think with that, thank you to Campaign Against Climate Change Trade Union group for putting the meeting on tonight and having, the thought and ideas to do that. It's been a fantastic meeting. Thank you to all of our speakers. I appreciate for some of you the timing isn't early evening, mid-evening, and we do really appreciate you coming on. It's been a fantastic session, and I did I messaged Claire during the meeting. I was like, each of these speakers could have had their own full hour session. You've just been fabulous. Do have a look at the Campaign Against Climate Change website. If you're here in the UK, find out what your union is doing throughout the year of Trade Union Action on Climate. If they're not doing anything, start making your own plan as a branch, because it is TUC policy and any affiliated unions therefore fall into that. And wherever you are in the world, it would be really, really great to see photos of your actions on the 14th and the 15th of November. Tagging the Campaign Against Climate Change on all the social media platforms so that we can all see those. Thank you all for coming along tonight. There's lots of resources in the chat, so if you can save the chat, please do. If you can't, I'm sure we'll circulate the resources around afterwards. And 2 minutes early, I always thought we might end up running over at some point. But 2 minutes early, I will bid you all a good afternoon, good evening, good morning. Enjoy the rest of your day as long as you've got of it. And please do keep in touch, because this needs to be the start of something, not just a one-off. Thank you.